All right, can you all see the slide? Okay. So as Shane mentioned, my name is Hubert Chathi. I met Shane at the Czech Hack Fest a couple of years ago. And yeah, I'm here to talk about integrating Moodle with an external tool. So just a bit about me. I'm currently working as a programmer analyst at Much Learning. Much Learning is a learning platform that provides advanced math-centric functionality. I started there about half a year ago, and I developed an integration with Moodle with the Much Learning platform. While developing that integration, I also developed an OpenID provider plugin for Moodle, so that allows you to use your Moodle account as an OpenID provider. And I developed an OAuth authentication method for Moodle, which allows you to call web services using OAuth. Previous to working at Much Learning, I worked at Remote Learner Canada along with Gavin, who is in this room. While I was there, I developed an integration with Jasper Server using Mnet. Jasper Server is a reporting server. I improved on the existing OpenID authentication plugin. So one of the Canonical employees had written up a quick little OpenID authentication plugin which allows you to log into Moodle using an OpenID identity, and I made some improvements, fixed some bugs, and so forth. Remote Learner itself has been involved in many different integrations, such as the original OKTech web services. The original OKTech web services for Moodle 1.9, that was before web services was added to Moodle Core in 2.0. Remote Learner did a Drupal integration, Alfresco, Illuminate, Adobe Connect, which I assume is the one that's being used on the iMoot site, Kaltera, and many others. And while I myself didn't work on those integrations, I heard my coworkers talk about them and sometimes bitterly complain when things weren't working. So to start off with, I'd like to learn a bit about you. I assume you're here because you're interested in integrating something with Moodle. Either you've integrated something in the past or you're planning on doing an integration. So I'd like to hear whether you already have integrated something or are planning to, and what tool the integration is for. Okay. So just a quick overview of this talk. This is going to be a fairly high-level overview of integrating tools with Moodle. I'm going to be examining different issues and considerations when you're planning an integration. and looking at different alternatives for addressing those issues. And I'm going to go through two different examples of integrations. Of course, I'm going to use the much learning integration as an example, and I'm going to use IMS LTI as another integration, as another example. This is going to be a technically oriented talk. It's going to have a slight focus on programming because that's my background. But if you're involved in an integration in other aspects as well, this should have relevant information for you as well. I'm going to assume a basic knowledge of Moodle programming, and by that I mean that I'm not going to talk about how to build a module, how to build a block. I'm assuming that whoever is developing the integration can work their way around Moodle. I'm also going to assume that we're doing things the Moodle way, and by that I mean that I'm assuming that the way the integration works is that students will be primarily working with Moodle, and we're going to be connecting Moodle users to the external tool. But some of the information should be relevant in the other direction as well. And of course, I'm going to be primarily talking about web-based applications, so I'm not going to talk about desktop applications. And throughout this talk, feel free to ask questions, and I'll try to answer them at an appropriate time. So, the first question to ask is why integrate with Moodle? Especially if you're starting something from scratch. So the M in Moodle stands for modular, which means that Moodle can be extended. You can add custom activities, custom blocks. You can customize Moodle in all sorts of ways. So why would you integrate something in Moodle why would you integrate something with Moodle instead of just making it part of Moodle? Does anyone have any ideas? Easier to maintain in what way? Easier to maintain is definitely a valid answer. I'm just wondering if you could clarify that. Yeah, certainly if there's... Okay, sure, Fred. Yeah, certainly if there's already an external tool written for you, then there's no point in redeveloping something. Yeah, sure. So if you don't have control over the external tool, then you need to do some sort of integration. Okay, so those are some good reasons. A couple of other reasons that I came up with is some things just shouldn't be done in Moodle. For example, you shouldn't really have an email client that's part of Moodle. Now I know that there are some plugins for Moodle that provide email-like functionality, but I'm talking about like a general purpose Moodle, email client should not be part of Moodle. But it's probably reasonable that someone might want to integrate Moodle with an email client to provide, say, single sign-on functionality. Sometimes if you are the tool creator, then you want to create the tool so that it can be used independently or with other LMSs. And of course, that's the situation that much learning is in. We want to be able to provide our tool and let it be used by people who aren't using Moodle. So the next question is, what does integrating mean? So if someone says that they want to integrate Moodle with some web-based application, then what could it mean that they want to do? Yeah, single sign-on. So if you want some examples of web-based applications to help you think about this, then some examples might be Mahara, which there's already a couple of integrations with, some webmail or groupware such as Gmail, social networking site such as Twitter or Facebook, conferencing software such as Adobe Connect, obviously, a content managing system such as Drupal, instant messaging, a wiki, or a blog. Yeah, a lot of sharing going on there. Okay, so here's what I came up with in sort of broad categories. So as Gavin said, a shared look and feel. They want people who are using the two systems to have a better user experience by not having two systems that look completely different. Shared users and passwords. So this allows people to log in to both systems using the same username and password. Single sign-on, as someone had already mentioned. So if someone signs on to one or logs into one system, then they're automatically logged into the other system. Content embedding. So this means that the content from the tool actually shows up in a Moodle page. And then the fifth thing is shared data, sharing data of some sort. So data could be, for example, grades, enrollment, calendar dates for events, navigation items, so some sort of sharing of data. That's a fairly broad topic. Yeah, single sign-on is very important because people don't really want to log into the system twice. They want to just be able to treat the system like treat the whole thing like it's one system. Yeah, kids forget their passwords. So this is going to serve as kind of an outline for the rest of this talk. I'm going to also talk about briefly about web services in Moodle 2.0. The Moodle 2.x series, just because it's fairly new, and then I'm going to go through the examples of much learning and LTI. One thing to note is that Moodle has many different types of plugins, which means that an integration has many different points that it can access Moodle. An integration can also involve multiple different plugins. For example, in the much learning integration, we have an activity module, a local plugin, and a block. The Mahara, if you want to integrate Mahara with Moodle, there's an activity module that's available. I don't know, Gavin, do you know if the activity module has been ported to 2.0 yet? Well, there's also a okay, good. There's also a portfolio plugin for Mahara that comes with Moodle. And not all of the types of plugins might be required when you do your integration with Moodle. For example, in the Mahara integration, you could just use the activity module, or you could just use the portfolio plugin, or you could use both. Whereas with the much learning integration, the local plugin is required because it takes care of the single sign-on portion, but the block and the activity module are optional. So some things to consider when you're planning an integration is the customizability of the different pieces of software. So how much can the tool that you want to integrate with be customized? And as well as how much can Moodle be customized? And the degree of customizability might dictate some of the other factors that I'll mention, because if the tool doesn't provide the functions that you need, then that will limit some of the things you're able to do. And it's not just a question of whether certain customizations can be done, but how easy can they be done, and how do they affect the maintenance of the site. So for example, in theory, you have all the code for Moodle, so in theory it's infinitely customizable, but in practice some customizations are easier than others. Yeah, so if the customization just involves adding a plugin, then that's fairly easy to do. But if you need to modify core, then that's going to make your maintenance harder. Next thing to consider is performance. When you do your integration, you want to design it in a way that things happen quickly for students, because if it takes too long for the external tool to load, then people are going to get frustrated. So when you're developing your tool, you need to consider For example, how are the two systems going to communicate? How often are they going to communicate? Are they going to communicate on every request? Are they going to do some caching? If you're going to do some caching, how do you make sure that things stay relatively up to date? And as well, where is the processing done? So for example, when I was doing the Jasper server integration, Jasper server is a reporting server. So when a user is looking at a report, then we need to make sure that they only see the information that they're allowed to see. So how does Moodle tell Jasper server what things the user is allowed to see? It can send a list of allowed contexts, or Jasper server can ask Moodle every time whether the user is allowed to see something, or Moodle can try to generate some SQL that will modify the Jasper server report. And when we were doing the integration, we did all three of those, depending on what exactly was being done, because some things were more efficient in certain situations than others. Security, obviously you don't want sensitive information to be leaked, and whenever you have two systems, then it just makes it easier for secrets to be leaked. So we need to be careful about that passwords don't get exposed, grades don't get exposed, quiz questions before before they're ready shouldn't be exposed, things like that. The tool should know who is a teacher, student, or admin, or you might even be able to use Moodle's finer-grained capabilities, not just the coarse-grained roles. If possible, you might want to add items to Moodle's navigation or settings block, or to Moodle's breadcrumbs, in order to make it easier for students to navigate. So as of Moodle 2, the My Moodle page, aka the My Home page, as well as the user's profile page, can be customized with blocks. And that gives us another interesting way to integrate with Moodle, because now the user can add information to their My Moodle page if we allow them. So if, say, you're doing an email integration, then you might want to write a block that displays the user's most recent emails, so that they can have an overview of what's in their inbox before they click on it. If you're doing a Facebook integration, you might want to show the most recent posts or something like that. Obviously, if the tool has student grades, then Moodle needs some way of getting the students' grades. If you're doing data sharing, such as grades, then you need to decide whether it's going to be a push or a pull. So, for example, is Moodle going to ask for information when it's needed, or in a cron, or is the tool going to send it when the information changes? And that will impact performance, and that will also be impacted by customizability. Moodle has a calendar, so if your tool schedules events, then you might want to have those events show up on the calendar. Moodle also has a messaging system, which if the tool wants to send a message to the user, then you might want to use Moodle's messaging system so that users don't get messages from too many different places. How much information should be logged in Moodle's log? So you might want to send information from the user's interaction with the tool into Moodle's log so that it all shows up in one place. The last item is global search, which is currently marked as experimental, and so it's not recommended to be used, but it is, I believe it is being worked on. And so when that is fixed, then you'll probably want you'll probably want Moodle users to be able to find content in your external tool. So you'll want to integrate with global search in some way. So having a common look and feel between the external tool and with Moodle is mostly an issue of theme design, block layout, things like that. So I'm not going to talk much about that because theme design is a whole different talk, and I'm also not too familiar with designing themes. Sharing users and passwords between the tool systems. So Moodle, as you probably know, has a whole bunch of built-in authentication plugins and contributed authentication plugins that allow you to log into Moodle using a password that's stored somewhere else. So if you use one of those authentication plugins and have the tool also use the same system, then that will give you a shared username and password. Another option is to allow the external tool, if you have that capability, to use Moodle's user database. So have Moodle manage the users, and then the external tool can use Moodle's database. So everything, all the information there is stored in the MDL_user table. It's fairly easy to understand. The only thing you need to be aware of is the way that Moodle stores databases. So it hashes, the way that Moodle stores passwords. So Moodle hashes passwords with salt to make sure that if someone somehow manages to get access to your database, then they can't steal everyone's passwords. So you need to be able to generate the hash in the same way. And all that information is in the validate internal user password function in lib/moodlelib.php. And that's about as much programming detail that I'm going to get into. Single sign-on is the next level up from shared users and passwords. Single sign-on, so if a user is logged into one system, then they're automatically logged into the other system for some values of automatically. So again, Moodle had some built-in authentication plugins that provide single sign-on and some contributed plugins. So Moodle comes with Shibboleth and Mnet. Mnet, of course, is used for single sign-on between two Moodle systems, as well as Moodle and Mahara. And OpenID is the authentication plugin that was originally developed by Canonical, and now Remote Learner has their version with improvements. The download location for the OpenID authentication plugin is available in the course for this presentation. I have a resources page, and it's linked to there. So this allows Moodle to use another system as a single sign-on provider. If you want Moodle as the authentication provider, then as far as I know, you have two options. The first one is Mnet, and the second one is OpenID, which is the local plugin that I developed at Much Learning. And again, the link to that plugin, if you want to download it, is in the resources page. Another option, which is a bit more complicated, is sharing a cookie or sharing the session between the two systems. So the way this works is that when you log into one system, then it sets a browser cookie, and then when you go to the other system, then it checks for that browser cookie, and then based on the contents of that browser cookie, it will fetch your user information and create your session on the other system. Now this option has a lot of restrictions, main one being cookies are plain text, but so you wouldn't store any sensitive information in the cookie. What you would do is you would, similar to the Moodle session cookie, the cookie itself would just be a long random string of the cookie itself would be a long random string of characters, and then so the tool would be able to look up the user's data from Moodle based on that long random string. Yeah, so if you're in Europe, you need to be aware of the legislation around cookies. So with cookie sharing, the one big restriction is that both systems have to be on the same domain, because cookies are restricted, because that makes sure that if you go to some random website, then they can't see your cookies from Moodle. So if you want to do this, then you need to be aware of the domain restriction. It is a lot. It is a lot of work, but it is the most seamless way of doing single sign-on. The last option for single sign-on is using OAuth. Now, OAuth itself is not a single sign-on method because it doesn't specify certain things that you would need for single sign-on, such as the communication URL, things like that. But if you have control over both systems, then you can make those decisions, and so OAuth can be used for single sign-on. Now the last thing I want to, no, sorry, this isn't the last thing. One other issue with single sign-on is that you may want to think about is single sign-out, which means that when the user logs out of the identity provider, then they're also logged out of all the other services. So that's really useful, especially if you have a lot of other tools that you're interacting with. It's probably a pain to log out of all of them. Now, as far as I'm aware of, it's only available in Mnet, or if you do your own cookie and session sharing. As far as I'm aware of, it's not available by default in any of the other methods. It is possible to implement on your own, but that would be something else you'd need to look into. Okay, so every once in a while on the Moodle forums, someone asks about single sign-on, and they try to develop their own single sign-on protocol, which I highly recommend against doing. And sometimes those protocols are very insecure. So some things that I've seen is something like this. So you have Moodle that generates a link to the external tool, and in order to provide single sign-on, it just tacks on the user ID, the Moodle user ID, to the URL, and then so the external tool will take that parameter and then based on that user ID fetch the user information from Moodle. So why is this bad? Any ideas? Yep, URL hacking is the biggest one. So some user looks at the URL, notices that there's a user ID parameter, and then wonders what happens if I change that user ID to 1. All of a sudden they're logged in as the admin user in the external tool. The other main reason that this is bad is users can't share links. So if a user, say a teacher wants to, not encrypted, that's true. It's probably not as bad of a thing if the only thing you're exposing is the user ID, because the user ID is sent all over the place anyways, so it's probably something that you can kind of assume is public. But yes, that's definitely a consideration. If you have a teacher who wants to send a user to the external tool, then the most obvious thing for them to do is to copy and paste the URL. But if you have this scheme, then if you just copy and paste the URL, then the user will get logged in as the teacher. So this is similar to URL hacking, except that there was no malicious intent. The users are trying to be nice, but the student gets privileged access anyways. Another thing that I've seen is Moodle generates a link and appends the user's username and password to the link. And here Garrett's comment about not encrypted would be very relevant, because your password is available for the whole world to see now. This addresses the problem with the previous option, in that URL can't be hacked anymore because the user needs the password as well. But this is still bad. Can anyone else think of any other reasons why this protocol is bad? Man-in-the-middle attacks, yeah, so that goes with Garrett's comment about the password not being encrypted. So someone who's observing the user can fetch their password. Another related issue is that the password is now in your browser's history, and that would be especially a major issue if the user is using a shared computer. Another issue is that if you use this type of scheme, yeah, it's passed via an HTML GET. Even if it was just a post, it would still be exposed on the network. Another issue is that if you use this scheme, then you have to store the password in plain text, which means that if your system is compromised, then the attacker now has access to everyone's passwords. So I've gone through a couple of bad protocols. If you really want to design your own protocol, which again I would recommend against, I would recommend instead using one of the existing single sign-on protocols. But if yeah, like Mnet, well, I don't recommend Mnet now. I'll talk about Mnet in a bit later. I'll talk about Mnet a bit later. But OpenIDE, Shibboleth. But if you do want to design your own protocol, later on I'm going to make these slides available for download. I had originally planned on talking about giving examples of a couple of more secure protocols based on the Mnet protocol and the OpenIDE protocol. But due to time, I decided to skip those. But those slides won't be available at the very bottom of the presentation under the extra slides section. So things to consider for the future. Gavin mentioned Mnet. The current Mnet protocol is deprecated. It will probably be replaced with something based on OAuth, probably OAuth 2, maybe with OpenIDE thrown in. I don't think there are any solid plans yet. But if it's probably not worth developing an integration based on Mnet. The protocol is also a bit tricky to implement. OAuth 2 is coming out at some point. It's not backwards compatible with OAuth 1. It's supposedly simpler, but it requires HTTPS. So that might be something to consider. There are some sites that already implement at least the draft version of it, such as Google Apps, Facebook, I believe, and MSN or Microsoft Live or whatever it's called. But if you do want to support both OAuth 2 and OAuth 1, since they're not compatible with each other, you need to do double the amount of work. And of course there's also a new OpenIDE spec coming out, which again is not compatible with the current OpenIDE specification, and that one will be based on OAuth 2. So those are just a couple of things to consider for the future. Content embedding, which is doesn't necessarily need to be rewritten, because there will always be OAuth 1 libraries available, and there will always be OpenIDE clients for the current spec. They're not going away. But OAuth 2 is supposedly preferred over OAuth 1. So you might need to plan on adding that as well in the future. Yes, they can run concurrently. I haven't personally read the OAuth 2 spec, but if you can't use the same URL for both OAuth 1 and OAuth 2, then it's easy enough to provide two different URLs, one for one and one for
It's Shane jumping in here. I might give Hubert just a minute or so just to jump back in if he can.
Sorry, I got disconnected there. I'm not sure what happened. What was I saying? Yeah, with OpenID, display none. Can you all hear me? Okay. Yeah, so as I was saying, OpenID discovers the provider. So OpenID 2 and OpenID Connect will be able to run concurrently. Okay, so the next topic is embedding content into Moodle. And so how do we get the tool's content into Moodle, or vice versa, if that's the way you're trying to do the integration? So there are four basic ways that I came up with. The first one is to use frames. The next one is iframe, so frames and iframes are kind of the same general idea. You basically have the Moodle content, and inside a frame it links to the external tool. And then there is an injection-based method. So this is where the tool's content actually becomes a part of the Moodle page. So content can be injected via either web services or via JavaScript. Frames versus iframe. Frames are ugly. I know that's an aesthetic opinion, but that's my opinion. They're ugly. They're also deprecated in HTML5, which means that the World Wide Web Consortium says that you shouldn't use frames anymore. But frames still have their uses, and some people like them. Iframes have fixed size unless they're resized using JavaScript, which means that if the iframe is bigger than the browser window, then users might have two scroll bars, which might be confusing or hard to use for users. Or if the iframe is too small, then it might not take up the full screen. So it's kind of a balancing act. Frames versus injection. With frames, things basically just work. Styling, scripts, links, images, they should all just work within a frame because it's served within its own context. Whereas if you're injecting the content into the page, then if your styling or scripts or links or images are referenced via relative URLs, then it's going to try to look for the content on your Moodle site and not be able to find it. So you need to do some sort of manipulation before you do the injection. But injection does look more seamless. You don't have the same kind of issues as you do with frames or iframes. Web services versus JavaScript. With web services, it requires that Moodle be able to either log in to the tool as the user or at least fetch the user's view. So say if the tool displays two different things depending on whether you're a teacher or a student, then Moodle needs to be able to fetch the right content. However, web services don't require client-side support. So if you If you have a lot of users who don't have JavaScript support enabled, then you'll want to do web services. JavaScript can also be tricky due to the same origin policy, which means that JavaScript doesn't like fetching data from other domains. Of course, if your tool is on the same domain, then it's not a problem. But if not, then you might have to do something to get around it. So either use a proxy or do something like JSONP or some other trick. JavaScript can also result in a pause before the content is loaded. So the user will see the Moodle page, and then the content will show up a bit later, which may or may not be noticeable. And of course, with JavaScript, you can always add a loading animation. So if you're sharing data between the systems, there are three main methods that you can use to share data. The first one is a direct database connection, and of course this only works if you have that type of control over both systems. This is probably the fastest because the systems access the database directly. There's no overhead. But there are some things that you might not want to access the database for. You might want to use the provided APIs instead if the database tables are too complicated. And there are some database tables in Moodle that you don't really want to use manually. The next option is web services. So say the tool will make a web service call to Moodle to fetch the data, or vice versa. The third option, if you really don't have any other alternatives, is screen scraping, which is basically, say if your tool provides grades and Moodle wants to fetch the grades, then Moodle would log into the tool, pretend it's a regular web user, and go to the grades page, look for the place where the grades are displayed, and then try to interpret the results. So it's screen scraping is a bit clunky, and it can be unreliable. If the tool decides to, say, change their layout, then your screen scraping might break. But sometimes it's the only option that you have. I'm going to talk briefly about web services in Moodle 2. It's a bit hidden in the administration settings. It's under Site Administration, Plugins, Web Services. The way web services are organized in Moodle 2 is that plugins or Moodle core itself can define functions that can be called. And those functions are organized into services, which is basically just a group of functions. And the services can be either defined by plugins or Moodle core, or they can be defined by the administrator. And then users are given permissions to call the services. You can call web services using different protocols. So Moodle comes with XML-RPC, REST, SOAP, and AMF, which is Flash specific. Or you can add your own protocol if you want. And users have extra authentication methods when they're using web services. One of them is a token-based authentication method, which means that the system generates a random token which is associated with the user, and the token can limit what service can be called, and it can also limit the source IP address. So that's useful for integrating with an external tool, because if you have a bunch of tools and they need to make web service calls, then you might not want to create a separate user for each tool. You can just create a token if you're using token-based authentication. So if you want to know how to write a web services in Moodle 2, there's a link to the Moodle docs page for adding web service. It's a fairly straightforward page. I also have a slide in the extra slides section of this presentation if you want to download the presentation after I make it available. But it goes through basically the same information as that docs page. If you want to call Moodle Web Services, those are the source files that you can look at to see how the Moodle test client calls web services. So a couple of examples of integrations. The first one is the much learning integration that I wrote. They're a good. It's good that there's a roadmap for web services. HQ has been doing a lot of good work, and there have been a lot of people contributing web services as well. So much learning integration uses OpenID for single sign-on. It uses web services using OAuth. The web services are called using REST. Content is injected using JavaScript. Well, that's partially true. Some of the content is injected using JavaScript. Some of it is injected using web services. The content that doesn't change depending on whether you're a teacher or user is done using web services. The content that does change depending on whether you're a user, a student, or a teacher is done using JavaScript. And since it uses JavaScript, content is fetched every time. So, as I mentioned, some content is injected using web services, such as the table of contents. And that information is also added to the navigation block, the Moodle navigation block, when you're looking at the activity. So the student can navigate between different sections within the activity. So to see what it looks like, I don't know how clear that is for everyone, but this is a sample page from the integration. It's showing book content from Much Learning. On the left there you can see the navigation block, and you can see that it shows the chapters and sections from the book near the bottom. At the top, in the Moodle breadcrumbs, you can also see that it's added the navigation information there. Much Learning also has a collaboration system that allows students to highlight content on the page and comment on it. So as you can see, near the center of the screenshot, the user's highlighted something and it's prompting the user to add a comment. So as you can see, using injection, things look more seamless. It actually looks like an actual module in Moodle. Next example is LTI, which stands for Learning Tools Integration. It's a standard that's put out by the IMS Global Learning Consortium. And it's supported by many different tools. Moodle, as of version 2.2, comes with an LTI plugin. Sakai, Blackboard, Desire to Learn, and others support embedding LTI compatible tools. Moodle can also be used as a learning tool via a contrib plugin, and again, a link to that plugin is available in the resources page in the course. It does web services. Yeah, Gavin has has a talk about LTI if you want to learn more. Also on that resources page, I have a link to Gavin's blog post, which includes a video of a demonstration that he did at the Ireland and UK Moot. So yeah, it does web services via OAuth. Some of it is a REST-based web service call. Some of it looks like an IMS-specific XML-based web service call. The identity is sent as part of the OAuth request, so it uses OAuth as their single sign-on. Content can be embedded via either a frame, an iframe, or a separate window. And it pushes grades to the Moodle gradebook using web services. LTI defines a fixed set of common roles, but if the LMS and the tool both agree, they can, on extra roles, they can define their own extra roles as well. So the way it works is that Moodle sends launch data to the tool, which includes information about the link that the user used, the user's information such as their email, username, name, and the roles that they're supposed to have. It sends information about the Moodle site, the Moodle context that the tool was linked from. So I think that would be information about the Moodle course itself. It gives you the option of specifying certain presentation information, which may or may not be used by the tool. In particular, it allows you to send extra style sheet information. And it also allows you to specify a return URL. So when the user is done with the tool, then they can return back to Moodle. And of course, callback information about grade push. It's a fairly basic protocol. It supports embedding content, user login, role setting, grade synchronization, and some support for common look and feel. As I mentioned, you can specify a CSS file to be included, but the specification doesn't say how that CSS is going to be used. So you might need a different file for each tool. If you are a tool provider, then it's a fast way to support multiple LMSs. As I mentioned, it's supported in Moodle, Blackboard, Sakai, Desire2Learn. And it might be good enough for a start if your tool fits within the model that LTI assumes, and you may be able to add more integration on top of that, depending on how much control over the tool you have. Here's a screenshot from Gavin's demonstration. There's a link to his blog post, and it looks fairly decent, but you can kind of see that it is an external tool, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you want a more seamless integration, then you might want to use something else. But LTI is standard, and it is a good way of starting out, especially if you want to support other LMSs. So, in conclusion, integrating can mean many different things. It can just mean a common look and feel. It can mean a single sign-on or shared users and passwords. There's a way to cheat design. What do you mean by that, Gavin? Integration can also mean embedding content from one. Yeah, you can also, you can do Moodle to Moodle LTI, so you can have one Moodle as tool provider and another Moodle as the tool container. So say if you want to sell content, then you can design your courses in Moodle and then have them available to other users using LTI. And you can pass your theme CSS. You can still mention it in your keynote, because I'm sure there will be more people than just the 15 people in here. So yeah, in this talk we compared different options for integration. We took a quick look at web services, and we looked at 2 examples of integrations of Moodle with external tools. So are there any questions? Yeah, there was a lot to take in. I even ran over time. As I said, I am going to make these slides available for download, and you can check out the resources page. The resources page has links to a couple of Moodle forums that are relevant. Of course, there's the general developers forum, and there's the web services forum. Are using web services difficult? I wouldn't say that they're difficult, but there is a bit of a learning curve, and especially depending on which authentication method you're using and which protocol you're using. So SOAP has a reputation of being a bit hard to learn. Writing them is. They certainly can be. I don't know if you'd need to add a web service to a theme. It would probably fit in better in a different type of plugin. The thing with web services is that a lot of libraries have different gotchas. And so if you run into one of those gotchas, then it can make your life very difficult. I think that the most difficult thing about writing a web service is deciding what the function is going to do, because you want to make something that's fairly generic, but you don't want to have too many parameters. It's the same thing as if you want to design an API. Yeah, if the theme needed some content to be pushed in, then maybe. Yeah, although another option, instead of having the web service in the theme, using Gavin's example of an alert system, is that you could write a block for that alert system, and if you wanted that alert system to show up in some place that blocks normally don't go, say in the header, then in your theme you could define a region for that block, just for that block and put the block in that region. That way it would work in other themes as well. Yeah, if you don't want it in the block list. Yeah, web services does have fairly good documentation in the Moodle docs. But yeah, as Bass mentioned, sometimes external tools aren't as well documented. What would be my holy grail to integrate? I do not have a holy grail to integrate. Coffee. I don't drink coffee. But I'm sure I'm sure someone could write a coffee machine block that would allow you to see the status of your coffee machine or turn it on, order coffee. There are a lot of nice tools out there, and I don't think that there is one specific tool that I think would be a holy grail. Yes, there is an Internet RFC coffee pot protocol, which was released on an April 1st of some year, I believe. Yeah, I know there are a lot of people who would be interested in a Moodle Facebook integration. All right, are there any other questions? Well, if there are no more questions, then I hope you all have a good day or night, depending on what time zone you're in. And I believe next on the program is the Cocktail Lounge. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the Moot.
Hi Hubert, Shane here. Just wanted to say on behalf of the whole iMoot team and everybody, yeah, thank you for presenting that and your insights into how it all works as well, and obviously some pitfalls and things to watch out for. So certainly appreciate your experience and your time. Thank you.